Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. The second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to be talking about shoestring budgets. A lot of us started with a computer and a webcam or something like it, and some of us are still doing that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that process and how to approach it and some of the mistakes that we made along the way. And so we'll be covering that in the second hour. Of course, tomorrow we have education. We don't put that on YouTube, so you'll need to be in Zoom for that. But that'll be 8 to 10 o'clock. We know Pacific Standard Time. And yes, we know that it is it's a holiday in many parts of the world. We're still doing it. So anyway, we'll still be there from 8 to 10, all 6 of us. So anyway, we'll be discussing education as long as there's questions coming in. And a reminder, at 2 o'clock, we will be Elle will be back at 2 o'clock today, and we'll be talking about Isadora. We had a great session yesterday. We really, every once in a while you just really get how cool Isadora is, and so Elle kind of showed us some really interesting things. So today should be a lot of fun. I'm going to try to build on what we did yesterday. All right, let's jump into the questions. Bill, what do we got?
Our first one comes from Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York, and Scott says, for someone who has a decent handle on Zoom, OBS, and vMix, what's the priority on next things to learn to become useful to the Office Hours community? What's most needed?
Guy?
I'd say learning more about webinar, how to cut this 1.0 version, and then as we grow on to 2.0, some of the behind the scenes of what they're doing in another Zoom room right now where you can learn 2.0. And then for me, I would say from a technical standpoint, learning the cloud, because that'll be probably 3.0. So start getting ahead of it now and learning just how to connect and how to spool up instances. That's where I see the future going.
You go, George.
Definitely for me, just cut a few more of the regular shows and maybe learning 2.0. Also, I think I've been playing with Universe a little bit, and I think that's definitely something to get ahead of for 2022.
Yeah, I think in general, the skill sets of being able to basically build bespoke solutions for clients is going to be a big deal. Being able to design how a group is going to do a specific show. You can see the beginnings of that in Office Hours 2.0, where using Universe and Isadora, we're designing a way to do this show. Now we can take that and copy it and then make adjustments to it for a different show. And we're going to start experimenting with that a lot in January. So I think that figuring out how to think about these is really important. And the first thing I would do is jump on as many different shows as you can. Each one of them is different. What we do with Todd is different than what we do in Belfast, is different than what we do in Office Hours 2.0. And by being on different teams, you're going to see different approaches, and you're going to see the same thing from different angles. And it's going to help you. I wouldn't worry too much about any specific technology right now. I have a feeling that next year it's going to move very fast. So a lot of our skill sets are going to be, a lot of the skill sets that we have now will be obsolete in 12 months. That's not the technical skill set is not important. It's understanding what makes a great show and understanding the general concepts of how to make it work is going to be more important than any individual technical skill, because as I said, I expect things to grow very, very fast next year. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
First of all, I have to stop and say, ho, 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 happy holidays. Okay, with that, yesterday, it was really interesting. I've been working on my Zoom ISO and getting that going. And then Guy came in and asked a question about how he can do something inside a Wirecast, where we were playing with playlists. And I started thinking to myself, well, I got a great idea to do a 4-panel show, because that's where I'm going with a 4-panel show, where questions are going to be asked. And I always like that. I don't know the name of the show. It's on ESPN, I believe, where they're doing, it's kind of like a game show, and people get ousted out after so many, if they've got low points or something like that. But I've got an idea of what I'm going to do with my show to make it a little bit more interactive using that idea.
Yeah, and to build off of what Jeffrey said, again, I'm just going to repeat. What's important is understanding how to do a great show. It's not important to, it is important to keep on learning the technology and use the technology as it's available to you to do something effective, but never assume that the technology that you're standing on top of is always going to be there. What's important is the general understanding of how to make a great show and what makes a great show, and then just keep dancing with what happens next. Next question.
Guy Cochran is here on the panel from Seattle, Washington, and Guy is interested in having Greg update us on how the year went in production from, quote, the mothership.
Go ahead, Greg. We'll jump to Greg first.
Well, thanks for asking, Guy. And I just want to say, I really wanted to make this panel today, since it's Shoestring budget day and solar production day, because I guess you might say I'm sort of the poster boy for those types of productions.
You're like the biggest shoestring I've ever seen. it's a largely a one person show, but rarely, not really shoestring anymore. But yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, and that was a point that I want to make, Alex. It's not like shoestring and solo production don't necessarily go hand in hand, but I did come from a very humble beginning, and we can talk about that later. But it's very kind of got to ask. But yeah, it was an interesting year, to say the least, here in the mothership. In fact, I just tore the whole thing apart last week and rebuilt it to make it a little bit more cloud friendly. So I'm using a lot more large monitors. But I think in the last year, we did somewhere just north of about 250 events. And I think the last quarter of the year was particularly crazy. I don't know if it was the same way for everybody, but like October, November, December was really crazy. I think I did something like 35 events in November and 33 events 35 events in October, 33 in November, and then 20 something in December. So it got a little crazy at the end of the year, but I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. Those that know my background know that I came from still photography, and I'm actually kind of, it's a little hard for me to say this, but we're actually thinking about closing the still photography business. I'm still doing a little bit of still stuff for friends and old clients, but I'm not really taking any new stills business on. And we are pretty much, neck deep in virtual production. And, even as we move into more live video production, we're moving more into live video production. So that's just where we're going, because there's just such a bigger upside on it. So yeah, it's been an interesting year. Couldn't have gotten here without a lot of you guys and in this community. So, as always, I just want to say thanks to everybody who has ever given me advice or I've reached out to, and all the advice I get on a daily basis from this group of folks. It's amazing to see so many faces consistently every single day. And so yeah, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, Greg. Go ahead, George.
Hey, Greg. Good morning from Northwest. Hey, so you've pretty much got your workflow locked down right now. What do you see yourself? I mean, whether it's NDI, Zoom, do you see yourself integrating anything else next year, or are you going to stick with what's working for you right now?
I don't see making a whole lot of changes, George, other than I'm just getting a lot more inquiries now for on-premise event production. And so that's what I'm going into. And in fact, I've been doing, I don't want to take away from the second half of the show about solo production, but one of the things that I've been doing a lot of recently is multi-camera shoots, and I'm doing it by myself. And I'm using these Sony cameras, the A9s, FX3s, and I can go and I can set 3 or 4 of these cameras up around a room, and using the Sony eye autofocus and the tracking, I can just tap the back of the screen, and those cameras almost become point and shoot. So I can do like a 2 or 3 person shoot pretty easily by myself, using an ATEM switcher, using, tools that we've talked about on this show quite often, Mix FX. I just did a 2-person production where I cut it live using Mix FX on my, it was a 4-camera shoot, 2 people. I cut it live with Mix FX Pro on an iPad. So
that's great.
That's it.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah. Greg, congratulations. I'm really glad you had a great year. I think that, you and I have talked a lot. We're about the same age, and the prospect of having my livelihood ripped away from me and having to reinvent myself like you did is daunting. And I think your real future is you need to write a book about how you overcome, because it's super inspirational to watch what you've done, what you've taken on, what you've learned. You're doing stuff that blows me away, and you're just the photography guy. It's really amazing.
I'm just a guy in my basement, Chris. I'm just a guy in my basement.
Doing your thing.
Living in a van down by the river.
Exactly. But
with a lot of connectivity. Yeah.
Survival, when your back's against the wall, survival will make you do a lot of things. And
well, it makes some people do a lot of things.
Well,
everybody is how we respond to those things is the key.
And for those who aren't familiar, I had zero video production experience prior to March of 2020 when COVID started. I was a still photographer. I had a fairly successful still photography business going on, and within just a matter of weeks, I saw my entire income for the foreseeable future just disappear and vanish, go out the door. And I sat around in my basement here, for many days languishing about what I was going to do. I thought about driving an Uber, and how was I going to generate some income? I thought about driving an Uber. Nobody was going anywhere. I thought about, grocery checkout, but those things were not going to, we're not going to pay the bills. Unfortunately, I had a corporate client who had a need to continue to get their message out in the midst of a pandemic, and pushed me sort of on the production side to help them do that. And they gave me an opportunity to do that. And I spent a lot of time down here. I spent basically 3 months, fully unemployed. And I spent 8 to 10 hours a day down here, just educating myself on media production.
And I got to say that the other thing is that you've won in our HDR test, that we're streaming out to YouTube right now. You look amazing. Like you definitely have the best frame we've ever had in the test. So it's quite a thing.
Let me just say, Alex, that my name and you look amazing, those words have never been put together in the same sentence.
I'm gonna tell you something, darling. You look marvelous, absolutely marvelous. All right, go ahead, Lois.
I wanted to ask Greg if there's some place that we can see your work. I know you hire out to do the video stuff for others, but where can we see your still photography?
GregGibson.com.
Awesome. Very good. All right, next question.
Comes to us from Scott McRae in Dallas, Texas. And
Scott
Rupert,
says, I think Rupert.
Oh, Rupert McRae. Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. Excuse me.
Because he's not on very often.
It's not like I have never met him. According to TheVerge.com, CES 2022 seemingly falling apart. Many big names withdrawing. Which of the big names who have announced their withdrawal are you most interested to see engage online instead?
I go, George.
Definitely Sony. I'm just going to say I know that OWC wanted to have a presence at CES this year. So it's very interesting right now, because you're talking about the big 3 major shows that all of us are interested in is pretty much not physical anymore, or at least for another year. So it's going to be interesting. So I want to see what Sony's going to do. Blackmagic doesn't go there, but it's going to be interesting.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So it is interesting, and Intel's really the only company that I see that dropped out that would give me any type of interest. I wasn't going to go there for Meta. I wasn't definitely going to go there for TikTok. And Google, there was a small presence, but they weren't there years prior in what I would use. I'd always look for the small little items that are going to really flourish and become big products in the next coming years, which is what this is all about, is about getting those products out to market and getting something. So I see a lot of companies that are still around. TCL is going to still be there from what I read, and Gary Shapiro is just basically, he's driving it home saying this is going to happen. We still have Pepcom, we still have Showstoppers, so there's a lot of things happening.
Yeah, of course, that's what everybody said before they canceled. so we'll see. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yes, just yesterday, Google canceled, Waymo canceled, and T-Mobile, Intel, Lenovo, TikTok, Meta, they all dropped out. So, I would probably want to see Intel and Lenovo's presentations. Samsung, I think, is still hanging in there, but I think they're weighing their possibilities, so it may change again. Who knows if they're going to continue.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I think that over the years of going to CES, looking back at it, it was really more the relationships, not just going and seeing the things. I mean, getting to talk with people and build up relationships is huge. So I'll miss that the most. But yeah, the Sony booth for sure. And a lot of the larger items and I'd say like crisp items like the 8K footage in the Sony booth is pretty jaw-dropping, especially on their wall. They have this crystal LED wall, those $1 million wall. I mean, it's so intense that they were showing fire and you could actually feel it. Like psychologically, it felt like you were getting warm because of the image, and it was so real. So I'm going to miss things like that, getting to see the technology that's 2 to 3 years out. And I don't know how well that's going to come across virtually over the web, because you can't see that 8K crisp clarity through your, laptop.
Yeah, I agree. The Sony wall specifically is pretty amazing, because they showed it at NAB as well, and it's 120 frame per second HDR, 8K signal, and you try to explain to people what that means and what it looks like, and the fact that it'll change the way we make films. But until you see it, you don't know that. Like it sounds like you sound crazy when you talk about the fact that you can't move the camera anymore because you get sick. So those are crazy things that start to happen there. And so, yeah, you're right that there are certain things you can't. I do agree with Jeffrey. Most of what I did at CES was wander through the other booths that were not the big booths. The big booths were kind of like, oh, I'll see something about that later. It's all the little booths of the Chinese manufacturers that are looking for a home, and the small companies that are trying to launch that we're always interested in. And of course, CES unveiled, showstoppers, those types of things are the things that you really go to. I mean, as a press person, you go to see, because that's where all the real data is. It's much simpler, and they give you free food. So anyway, but I think that that was a lot of fun, to do that. I'm not saying that they won't do CES, but I'll be pretty surprised if they keep it going, because from a brand's perspective, it's a real, if this turns into a super spreader, it's going to get all over all the brands that went after a bunch of once the big brands start leaving, then it takes all the air cover out. And so if you stick with it and it turns into a super spreader, every brand that was there is going to get, feel the pain for that. Go ahead, Courtney.
The other thing that I would miss about NAB and CES, which I used to go to, is the one-to-one, being able to quiz the developer, who is many times there in the booth, and especially in those small booths that Alex talked about, you can actually talk to the person who wrote the software. And if you have one of those products, you can talk to the product manager about problems you have with the product and exchange ideas with them on a one-to-one situation. And you can't do that virtually in almost any of the situations. I find that almost difficult to do, because I won't expose it to a larger group,
Yeah, I've kind of weighed that. I've thought a lot about that as we do our second hours when we bring these folks in. And we are going to have some second hours that happen in after hours instead of office hours, because I have folks that want to come in, but they can't go on YouTube. They know that there's a chance it could be recorded, but they don't want to put it on that we know it's going to be published. So we're going to see more of that as we go into 2022. I do agree with you that you can't, I don't know. I think I really have been weighing the value of it. I mean, there's a lot of the information that I would get that you wouldn't publish, but you would get talking to someone one-on-one. But the amount of information we get when we have someone on a second hour and we buzz, 30, 40, 50 questions at them, I feel like I walk away with more information in general, because the quality of the questions, there's so many questions that I wouldn't have even thought of. People that are asking, and I think that the breadth and depth of the questions that we get as a group is better than anything I was doing in person, even though I might have some nugget that I got that they wouldn't have said in person. I'm not sure that it outweighs the incredible value that I get from everybody asking questions together in a way that you couldn't do in person. And so I'm not certain that it makes as much of a difference, but I do see where you're coming from. Next question.
Alex Lindsay, some fella from Nevada, California, has a very popular question. What's your favorite holiday movie?
Yeah, we have to go quickly because there's so many answers. It was I thought it'd be a fun question, and then it's a big question. So just the names and maybe one sentence about why you like it. That's it. Go ahead, Tony.
Bridget's wife with the fabulous Whitney Houston.
Oh, here we go. Go ahead, Tobias.
The first Home Alone, which in my memory, like 80% of the movie is the fort fight, but actually it's not that long at the end.
We just watched that last night. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Die Hard 1, 2, and 3.
I almost asked the question, what is your favorite movie and why is it Die Hard? Anyway, go ahead, Todd. Go ahead, Todd. Todd Raines.
Sorry about that, laughing and hitting the mute button. So my wife and I enjoy, of course, The Christmas Story, but it was Die Hard for me. So I will say, though, you can find it free on Pluto. Otherwise, every other channel is charging for it now.
Yeah. Mitchell?
It ain't over until Hans Gruber falls from the Nakatomi Towers.
Hey, just no spoilers. All right, Sky.
Sorry, I was falling from the White Christmas. I'm surprised nobody's already, because I loved Bing Cosby because he's from Seattle or Spokane, and then Danny Kaye. But of course, It's a Wonderful Life. You can't not go with Christmas without A Wonderful Life.
Yeah, absolutely. George?
I'm going to go the opposite direction. The romantic comedy, Love Actually, based out of London.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, Love Actually gets a vote, and White Christmas, which of course is the second best musical of all times.
What's the best musical of all times?
Singing in the Rain, no question.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
Ian Kelly.
Courtney?
I'm another vote for A Christmas Story because I grew up in the 50s, so it kind of identify with that time period.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, of course, It's a Wonderful Life was all on the TVs, but in the last 10 years, I've been watching on Christmas Eve Casino because getting ready for CES, so that's my tradition.
Go ahead, Bill.
It might have all been covered, so I'm going to watch My Neighbor Totoro, which is probably my favorite movie of all time.
Lois?
It's a Wonderful Life. But then there's that comedy with that weird guy where he's Santa Claus and falls off the roof, and that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's when I grew up, It's a Wonderful Life was actually an event. Like sometime the week before the Christmas, my dad would have everybody over, and there was a big thing. So I think that's probably the most Christmassy for me. All right, next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis is on the list next. He says, new Zoom feature to save gallery view order. Where does this fit into production? Will this affect all the participants' gallery view?
It does appear like it does. We've done a couple tests there, and it does appear that you can freeze it so that you can control the gallery view. And that becomes important in some events that we've worked on where there's a very specific area, especially in for instance, in some Buddhist traditions, you have a tradition of who is where in the room. And even in the Catholic tradition, you have a very, the person in the center and people on either side make a difference. So this has been a big thing that people have pushed for a year or two of like, hey, we have a way that we do this, and we really can't do our events. They don't feel like our events at home without that information. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, this is something educators have been asking for a long time. And it's really interesting because yesterday during after hours, I was watching, as I'm usually like either the first or second square. And now I'm actually being pushed down to third or fourth, which is not a big deal. But if I'm looking for myself to see how my hair is or something like that, then it gets tough to do.
Yeah, go ahead, Lois.
This isn't clear to me whether this is meetings or webinars or both. And then the other thing is, if you have a place where you want people in a circle, you could perhaps make up a special immersive view that you then put people in.
Put blank spaces in is what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm saying arrange it the way you want it to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Tobias?
Given that people view on different size galleries, is the only safe bet to put people towards the top left corner and consider that your order? Or could you really build a center order and find it reliable?
I think I think that their assumption for what you're ordering is probably the first 25. I don't think that I think if you go into something that's denser, I think that I would assume that you can control the first 25 for everyone, but depending on how they have their own setup, it would change. But we haven't actually tested that. So it's probably a worthwhile test within meetings, and then probably to create some set webinars to figure that out. But I think that most people that we've talked to that this has been an important thing, they've only been really concerned about the first 5. Usually it's first 5 or 6 people they want at the top, and they want this person in the center and these people on either side. And again, in a handful of plenaries, they've been interested in this, and it's been mostly religious institutions that have had it because there's a lot of meaning to where things, right hand, left hand, all kinds of stuff that matters. And so to it means something. And so that's been where we've seen most of the interest in this thing. But then also plenaries of just having the host in a specific place and the people that they're interviewing in another place. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas Carmichael says, where do you see the movie theater industry in the next 3 to 5 years as content delivery and presentation in the home become cheaper and better?
I'll go with Courtney.
I still see it hanging on because it's one of the few places you can get the large screen experience like the IMAX or the Dolby Cinema experience. And I think they're now just trying to hold on through the pandemic, and hopefully if COVID becomes like the seasonal flu, if it gets down to that point, then I think you'll see a lot of them reopening. They just announced last week that the Cinerama Dome, which has been closed in Hollywood for the last year and a half or so permanently, and the Decurion Corporation picked them up, so they plan on reopening it, but I think they're going to refurb it first. So I think they're gonna stick around. It's now become cheaper to exhibit in those large theaters, and I think people miss the ability to see something in the company of other people, to see, to amplify the reaction, and to experience a film with a group of people is a completely different experience than sitting at home in your underwear and watching TV.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I agree with Courtney. I think it's going to become more specialized, maybe more diversified. I just recently did some work in motion graphics for an IMAX theater here in Wilmington and Philadelphia. And until you've actually seen your own work up on an IMAX screen with Dolby sound, it's just an experience. And you cannot quite get there yet in your home because nobody has a screen quite that large in their home. Well, maybe Alex does, but everybody else, I think it's just going to be a different thing down the road for them.
I go ahead, George.
So quickly, I'm watching right now Office Hours on an iPhone, my iPad, and obviously a couple of screens here. I think it's going to become difficult. Like in my area, like with the theater I go to, they have 24 screens and they all have audio issues. Unless the movie theater industry is going to rebuild these screens and really put in some decent audio, folks like us, folks going to continue to go, but the average folks like us that understand the technology and want to see the clarity and the audio, they're going to lose us unless they revamp a whole lot of these theaters, and it's going to take a lot of money to do that.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
I think what I'm hearing and also observing from history is that the specialty, the art houses, the people that have an audience that would come regularly, they will survive. But the small little cineplexes, I think they will be turned into other office buildings and office spaces but also I'm kind of the word cheaper. I think the money that they're going to get from us is just in a different format, because we're still paying $9 for this service and $10 for that service and subscription base, but versus going to a theater and paying $9. But again, those theaters often only made their money from the popcorn sales. They didn't make it from the tickets.
Yeah, Bill.
Here in Southern California, I think they're trying to recapture something special, and they're doing it through adding a lot of special effects in the theaters. There's a chain, Edward Cinema, and I've only gone to a couple of them since the pandemic kind of shut us down. But they have kinetic seats that rock and roll. They have some specific theaters that have scent that is key to the movies, sprays of water and things like that. So they're trying to become more immersive in terms of an experience you can't easily get at home. And I think there's going to be continuation of that as they try to differentiate themselves from what you can do at home.
Go ahead, Tobias.
I went to West Side Story in the theaters 2 nights ago, and the trailer for House of Gucci was exclusively about how you have to see this in a theater. It's only worth seeing in a theater. Come to the theater, come to the theater. It wasn't about the plot. It wasn't about the performances. This was made to be seen on the big screen. So I guess there's a promotion to get the habits reformed.
Yeah, there's a lot of filmmakers there's largely older filmmakers that are really desperate to try to hang on to a piece of the past. I think that my guess is that we're probably going to see 2/3 to 3/4 of the theaters go away. The screens, not the number of theaters, but the number of screens. You will only have theaters that have seats that you can buy. You can buy the specific seats. There won't be any general admission when we come out of this, because that was a horrible thing. And the other thing is I think that you'll have the two big chains that are everyone's going to have to get closer to what Dolby and IMAX are doing. You're not going to be able to have kind of a relatively cheap experience. I think art houses will actually have a pretty hard time because most people that I'm talking to in the industry consider everything other than event movies to be kind of dead in the water. So unless the cinematography or the visual effects are something that you should see on a big screen, most people are deciding that that's going to go to straight to one of the subscription services. That's kind of how they're thinking in the future, and they're also thinking about, again, the extension from 2.5 hours to 6 hours or 8 hours. If you look at Hawkeye, if you look at obviously all the stuff that Disney's been doing, everybody's thinking in 6 to 8 episodes, not 2.5. The ROI on IP is very low at 2.5 hours compared to the ROI on 6-8 hours that's going to hold people in a subscription service. So I think that's a piece of the puzzle that people are starting to think, because you can make lots of movies, you can't come up with lots of ideas. Obviously, they're having trouble with that, and so they want to get the most out of each idea. So building series around those things inside of the platforms is way more. The ROI is much higher for them than taking a chance at having a great idea bomb for whatever reason in a theater, and then that idea they burned it up in the atmosphere. And so there's a lot more interest in that, at least the folks that we're talking to. I think the theaters do have a lot of opportunity. I think one area you want to watch is the live to theater could be really interesting. There's a lot of people experimenting with that. Kanye just experimented with that a couple weeks ago, and it was filled up a lot of theaters. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, up next from Dallas. Outside of work, how will technology benefit your holiday season this year?
I go ahead, Lewis.
Well, we don't celebrate Christmas, but I will take that more broadly for my winter season, and that is we're going to be replacing our fluorescent lights that light the ceiling with new digital panels, and that's going to be a big job.
Good, Todd.
Yeah, for me and my wife, we're using obviously things like FaceTime and Zoom meetings and stuff to connect with our daughter who lives out in this land, California. So that's mainly how we use it to keep connected.
Go ahead, Tobias.
A question last week spurred me to buy the Govee LED strip lights, and so now they're surrounding my living room, and we'll be on party mode for New Year's.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, so for the first time in 21 years, we are actually at home for Christmas. So I will be probably Zooming with my family back in the UK. And I did want to say that I unfortunately had to attend a memorial the other day done on Google. It was the worst experience. I felt so sorry. So sometimes we forget the distance between where we are and where others are in this technology.
And where some people are. I mean, I think that some of those memorial services are turning out pretty well. It's just that it's very big hit and miss. There's probably, Jeffrey?
Well, I just equipped the sleigh with a brand new Mac M1 and, of course, LED lighting for Rudolph. No, I've been doing virtual decorations with a projector in the front yard. And, of course, I've been doing a lot of 3D printing of holiday decorations. Lots of cool stuff. I thought I had, I have one right here. That's basically these really cool ornaments. I've been printing tons of these. It's just amazing what you can do.
You're printing those ornaments?
Yes. Yeah.
Why didn't I think of
it's
that?
Crazy. And I got a little train set. I did a train scene where the train set goes around. I need to get the motor for it, but they got the little scene, the mountainside scene, and you can light it up and everything. It's going to be really cool next year, of course. So
I don't know why I never thought of it. You could print an entire HO, like all the buildings and everything else. You could just download them and print them all out and then paint them, and then they would be the thing. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. It's a great idea.
And the more important thing is my brother's always been a Kiss fan, and I could never get him anything for Kiss. I 3D printed him 2 things I know he's not going to have.
Very good. Very good. All right. Let's go to the next question.
Conrad Marshall in Atlanta is up next, and he says, any thoughts on Zello as comms and getting the most out of it?
You might have stumped us. I think so many of us are using Unity as our backbone for that. I don't know of anybody that actually uses. I've heard of people using it, and gamers use Zello, I think, a little bit more. But I don't know of anybody in production using Zello. Usually it's ClearComm's Agent IC or ClearComm or Unity. And I haven't seen a lot of other things recently online. So Sorry about that, Conrad. Unless someone raises their hand, we'll keep moving. Sorry about that. We don't have a lot of users. Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis is up next. He says, what's the best approach to scheduling some expert advice time in after hours? I want to take you all up on the offer to help color our Sanctuary pan tilt zoom cameras.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
I'd say be a little patient because not everyone's going to be there maybe at first to respond. But Lois had a good example of this recently by scheduling her birding hour, where she said, "This is the time I'm going to be here. Anyone that can join me, please do." And if people have an interest, they will make an effort to get there at a specific time if you set it. Other than that, I'd say we do know that certain, like if you told us the exact model of PTZ cameras, we may know who has that exact model, and so we may say, well, we're willing to help you in a general sense, but you really should talk to Peter over here because Peter really knows that camera. And so that's probably, I think, the way I'd approach it.
Go ahead, Sky.
I think that the word ad hoc comes to mind, is that we look organized, but we're very much a crowdsource concept. And consequently, I love what was just expressed is I've got a need, who's here, who's available, and then that follows up. But I also appreciate Bill's comment is, or patience.
Yeah, go ahead, Tobias.
Yeah, to do it the best, I'd love to have a bunch of staff members, standing on the Beamer and operating the system. So that's why. So
what I would do is I would ping me with a time. We'll go back and forth in Discord and figure it out.
Sure.
And then I can promote it. So I can say, hey, we're going to play around with coloring cameras. Coloring some PTZ cameras. It's going to be on this time. And I can kind of set that up, and then people will know to go. And we can. There's a couple of us that I think we can probably figure out a couple of people that would be the best people to be looking at it. Which PTZ cameras are you using?
They're Panasonic 30X 4K.
Yeah. So so there's a couple of people here that use cameras that are similar, at least are used to the Panasonic interface, and so I think that we can kind of fish around and figure out who should definitely be there. You need one or two people that absolutely have to be there for that. And then we'll let everybody else know, because people would love to learn that process too. That's what we get interested in after hours, is just having a discussion about something technical. So it's just that, people will just kind of show up for it. But what I'm trying to do is schedule these not more than once a week. Not more than once a day. So if you talk to me about it, we can schedule it a week or so out and put it in a specific slot. And then I can put it in the email. I can, that type of thing. Then we'll have lots of people there.
Great,
so we can all learn together. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great idea. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas says, what are your favorite non-technical second-hour episodes? What would be some good examples of less technical subjects to point people to on YouTube as a demonstration that office hours can tackle these subjects as well?
I think some of the ones that we've talked with artists about what they do, I think are the Daria Musk, Peter Hillman, Brian Vander Ark, but also Michael Krasny. I think these are all ones that were less technical from a discussion and more of a artistry craft kind of approach to things for after hours. So I think, I'm just riffing here until someone raises their hand, but no one's going to. So those are the ones that I would say. So anyway, yeah, go ahead, Noah.
I would say the business concepts, at least for me, are super relevant and important in that growth and development. I really love Sky's conversations and added comments here and there about the philosophical stuff and the undertones that happen in conversation as well.
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, and Daria really did feed my soul in the art of her music, and that was a thing I didn't even know I was missing. And so that Artist Thursday, I think it has a philosophical, but also a thing to my soul.
It'll take us a little time to mature that, but my goal was always with Thursdays was to inspire us less than teach us, and just have, we'll learn stuff by talking to folks, but just inspire us with folks that are doing something interesting. And it doesn't have to be necessarily right down the path of technology. But a lot of musicians, but I think also just visual artists and other artists. That's how we really met. Todd Reynolds came on for us. He'd been watching, but that's how we really got to know what he did. And so I think that more of that will be on Thursdays. So stay tuned for that. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, don't forget that on the Office Hours Global website, there is on the front page, if you scroll down far enough, a good little bit of those individual things. So you can find them easily and see some of the softer subject kinds of things.
And a shout out to Ken, who keeps an incredible. The website has so much information, and it's so easy to find. It's just really an amazing contribution that Ken provides for this organization. Go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to say, there's also been some good content on prepping speakers and managing show flow.
Yeah.
From a non-technical standpoint, just more in terms of aesthetics and those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Cindy Drozda, it looks like, is up next. I'm interested in hearing about what makes a good show. My interest comes from one-person video of wood turning.
Go ahead, Tony.
I think the most important thing about a good show is that it's not about you. It's not even about your guests. It's about those who are watching and listening, and making sure that you keep them engaged in what is happening in the conversation.
Hey, go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, so Cindy is a good friend. We do this kind of wood turning stuff from our studios, one-person studios. I co-host her events. She routinely gets about 250 attendees every month to watch her demonstrations. She's a professional, and I'm interested in what others have to say about this as well. For us, it's usually, for me, typically about a 2-hour demonstration, direct to Zoom. People are watching and interested. We've got pretty good camera setups now. Being a one-man show, it's hard to kind of build an arc of a show, but certainly there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. But just trying to keep the viewer engaged while we're managing all the technology is sometimes tricky. So,
yeah, and Todd, I would lean into our community, because I think there's a lot of people that would come up under what you're doing and help you with what you're working on. I think that there's a lot of places that we could have some fun, and I think that a lot of people are fascinated with the content you're creating.
Yeah, and we have, and I've been watching for about a year, at least over a year now.
Yeah,
and there's some creators that I've learned a ton from. So, but there's
I think
always more to learn, right? So,
a lot of times for us, these kinds of shows are an opportunity for us to learn how to do a better show. And so you can actually have people helping with some of these. Maybe not every single event you do, but I see a possibility of, number one is we would make Mokana available to your show if you wanted to customize one for you. I mean, we'd love to, because it's a model that I'm interested in. Like we kind of pick shows that we're interested in, and then I think you'd have people that would cut the show for you remotely. Like we know how to do that. So I mean, that could take some of the pressure off of it, and then have someone maybe even asking questions.
I do have to kind of qualify. Some of the shows we do are ticketed events, right? So most of them are. So there's a fee to get a ticket and watch.
Right.
That's one of the main income streams that some of us have. So.
Well, it might be worth doing a test with that isn't ticketed, and figure it out, and then figure out if that's a model you want to continue, and then you can hire those folks to help you with it if it makes a better show.
Yeah, and we were starting to ask about comms and stuff last week, and trying to learn how to communicate, at least back channel for Cindy and I when I co-host her, to try and help produce the show a bit better. So
that's great. And then of course use after hours for that as well, which I know you are. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, before pandemic, I would have said spectacle and insight, and I think you have both of those in your show already. I think we love seeing the example of what you're doing and the insights you give to it, and it can even be personal insight about life too. During pandemic, what I've learned here is that I think community. I think anything you can do that can build a community around what you're doing is probably what's going to make a show solid and move forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Sky.
So what's the quote about? You don't know how do you carve an elephant? You just chip away everything that doesn't look like an elephant. So if you're doing a carving of a thing, I think the structure is you're starting with a vision, but I still remember the structure. I didn't realize there was a run of show for a football game, but of course there has to be, because you have to air those commercials at certain points. It's very structured, but you still don't know who's going to win. And so I guess I'm really riffing on your comment of understanding story, that there is a beginning, there is a middle, and there is an end. Now, do we know what it is? Maybe not, but maybe that's the tension. Maybe that's the excitement, where you're going to, like Chris Fenwick can burn up a vacuum and not even know it.
I often think my dad has when he thinks about what he's going to do, he does a lot of talking about things, and he has 3 things in his head all the time. How do you entertain, inspire, and educate? Like those are the three things that he's, that's always trying. And so just how do you fit, what do you have to fill in those specific areas? Next question.
Next one comes from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. He says, do any of you have your lighting rigged to automatically turn on at the start of Zoom calls? And if so, how? Thanks.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I hate to attach anything automatic to Zoom, cameras turning on, lighting turning on, because I use my room for other things too, and I couldn't handle that excitement of all of a sudden the lights coming on or the camera turning on at an inappropriate point. I have a firm and power switch with a manual button that turns everything on to do anything with Zoom, and I just click and everything's ready to go.
Go ahead, Noah.
So I have a series of smart switches by a popular device that is in most homes. I can't say the name of without triggering stuff. And so I have a few of those devices on that. And so I walk in and I say blank, turn on studio. And about 80% of my stuff gets turned on at that point, which is great. And then there's a couple things I need to do by hand, but hopefully eventually I'll figure that out as well.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I also have routines, which you can set in the Amazon Echo, which shouldn't trigger anyone, but or the home device from the G-Word. To set up, if I'm going from upstairs to downstairs, it'll turn off all the stuff upstairs and turn on all the stuff downstairs that I want to have on. So you can set up routines to do all that. You could easily do the same thing for Zoom calls, although you wouldn't trigger it. You just trigger it with a voice command and not with anything specific that happens on the computer. And I do have a question about how to control things that's coming up later.
Excellent.
Related to this.
George?
So right now, the Sidus link is sequencing all the lights in my office for Zoom. So I just hit the app before I come downstairs, and it turns on everything. And U lights turn off in my basement, so I'm all set in that end. I still have to power sequence the ATM, and I reboot my M1 every day just for the purpose of making sure the ATM connects. So that's the way I'm using the studio for office hours right now.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, for me too. It really depends on what I'm doing. If I for instance, if I'm doing an unboxing, I have an overhead light that I want to turn on to shine on there. A lot of work mode, and of course, I have automation that'll turn on certain lights, so when I get into the studio, I can see what's going on. But otherwise, I say LA turn on front of house, and that turns on the lights. By the way, that's my term for saying instead of.
Yeah, there we go, Bill.
I know Noah said he had smart switches. I have really dumb switches. And so that's a panel. It's an old Elation switch box, but I've got all my individual lights that are behind me in my regular shot on those. So I turn on the master and they just all come on.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from David Brady here on the panel from New York City. He says, my camera is a Lumix GX-85 Micro Four Thirds, and the iOS app access to control is relatively limited. I don't think I can upload LUTs, so where is a good point to begin to dial in my office hours look? Should I start with white balance, fStop, ShutterSpeed, ISO, or so forth?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it's going to be all those. The white balance on those is a little tricky. If you have control of your lights, like right now, I'm using a light that's bicolor, so you can see if I switch to something cooler, I'm going to appear very cool. So you want to white balance that camera to either a true white or a pale blue card. And you can see this light actually changing color as I swap back and forth. Cool color, and then. The next one is f-stop, crank it wide open, or if you can, get a better lens, because if you got that kit lens, I have the same camera, if you got that kit lens, it's garbage. I mean, it's really soft. So if you can get something, even the $200 Mikey lens, that's a prime, I'm using right now, the Mikey 35, it sharpens that camera up so much. And then shutter speed is going to be reverse of whatever, so if your frame rate's 30, you're going to go to 1/60th of a second, and then your last one, ISO, is seasoned to taste with the amount of light that you're outputting. So you're probably going to be at like 640 on your ISO or 800. That's it.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, Guy hit a few of my points, but the first thing is it's things that don't have to. The best way to dial in your look starts with things that don't directly involve the camera. So it's the lighting. So you can have the best camera and lens in the world, but if your lighting doesn't look good, your camera's never going to look good. The second thing is you have to think of your camera and your lens as a paired system. You got to think of it as it's like going out and buying the greatest stereo receiver ever and then putting some crappy speakers on it. So I would argue that, you really need to invest more in the lens than you do in the camera. Obviously, I am a big fan of the short depth of field. I like the shallow depth of field because it really makes you pop out from the background.
Right.
As a still photographer, one of the things I always used to teach was, if you really want people to be attracted to your images, you have to show them things that they don't see every day. And so, the average person on the street sees images that are made with basically a 35 to 70 millimeter focal length in somewhere the f4, 5, 6 depth of field range. So as a still photographer, I was always a fan of extremes. So I liked either like the 16 to 35 or the 200. So show people, if you really want to stand out, be different, give people images that they don't see every day.
And next question. I'm sorry, Roscoe. Sorry.
Oh, Guy and Greg nailed it. Move on.
Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis is up next. How would office hours be different if the only change were that there were to be no live question askers and instead questions were pre-foraged on social media forums? Can that model work?
Go ahead, Lois.
Well, it wouldn't be office hours if it was that way, but it certainly is a way that you can run a show. I am the co-host on the Davis Garden Show. We have an email address. People can send us questions with pictures and everything. Of course, it's a radio show, so the pictures don't come out, but we can talk about what the pictures show us. And for the listeners, it doesn't really matter if the guest is sitting in the room with you or if they're remote by on the phone, or it's a question that got answered through email or something. I could easily see that for people who are watching this on YouTube and who are not participating directly in making questions, it wouldn't make a lot of difference. But for us, for the audience that are here, our producers, it would make a huge difference.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I can't imagine a world without Bill asking the questions or Alex setting the context of the question. The human element makes this show what it is, and it's good that we have audience participation, but being able to wrangle them all is very important. It should be done by a human.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
As for the audience, I think there'd be a level of confusion, especially if they don't know where those questions are, to be able to read them through. As for panelists, it does give you a couple seconds to kind of refresh yourself on what you were planning to say as you read the question along with Bill and go from there. So I think that there would be a lot of discombobulation off this whole thing, and I wouldn't want to see it this way.
Go ahead, Tobias.
I didn't mean not to read out the questions. I just meant that the questions weren't received live in Mukana.
Yeah, we've definitely done lots of shows like that. Before Zoom, I mean, that's what we did, was we would gather questions and we would do those, even using previous versions of Mukana, where, and I think that there's a real power to it. One of the things that's interesting is that you can have it be something that I'm going to announce something in a week. People can start adding questions and voting on those questions and chatting about those questions. What it does actually is it creates a conversation that goes on all week related to that subject. And that subject is kind of the tent pole that the live event. I do think the live stream makes a difference. Everyone kind of builds up to now watching the live event. There is something very powerful about people still being able to vote on things and still be able to potentially ask things and still being able to chat live. When you take the live experience, the reason to be there out of it, we see that the average view time drops dramatically. The people returning, all the stats go down when you're not going live, and you're not interacting with the audience. So interacting with the audience is after doing 2,000 events, I can tell you that interacting with the audience is the number one thing that affects how many people stay for how long. Like there is no other factor other than spending, north of $5 million on your content for that moment. You can keep people if you spend a lot of money. Apple's able to do a pretty good job, but that's a really expensive way to do it. This is in a relatively cost-effective way. It is the number one way to do it. But you absolutely can do it ahead of time, as long as. But remember that voting is important because every voter, every person who votes on a question is now a stakeholder in that question, and they're waiting for that question to get answered. And so if you just take questions in and don't give them any value to them that is driven by the audience, it makes the product itself a fraction of the value. So a very, very small fraction of the value. So the voting process we found to be super important over time. So yeah, you can do it. This is the easiest way to do it. If you're gonna do it every day, I wouldn't do that. So yeah, but we've definitely done hundreds or maybe even over 1,000 events that have involved just taking questions in from the audience. And we do it a lot in podcasting. For like This Week in Photography, we're going to open with the news. We're going to talk about a specific subject. And then we're going to have 3 questions that we're going to answer as a group, and that was very effective. But you can build whole shows around that. Next question.
David Brady in New York City, and here on the panel often, says LG plans to announce a dual-up series of monitors at CES. Any thoughts on a monitor with this profile? It's double the screen area in the vertical orientation, keeping a single monitor footprint, and they have a link there, so if you want to look at it.
Go ahead, Todd.
I read this short article in Engadget or CNET or something like that. A dual-up display for me would, I think, be very handy. I've been tempted and intrigued by the quad display that LG has that Guy Cochran showed several times, but in my shop, I just don't have the room. And so if I show this is my main monitor, the only place I can really go is up. So that would work for me, and that's what I would be interested in.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's about time. I mean, Guy has shown some interesting technology, and the fact that you could have two monitors inside one monitor, and maybe half the screen is a Mac and the other half is a window, and you could drive your mouse across the two. That will be something.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
That's one of the things that I am very excited to see I go to CES, and I do have it scheduled. For me, the monitor. First of all, CES, once again, it's just to gauge interest. So LG might not put it into production. It's like they had the roll top monitors. They just didn't really work that well. But the biggest thing for me is being able to turn those two monitors, because I'm going to actually put 2 different computers on those monitors if I use something like that, and I want to be able to angle it a little bit differently.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill. Real quick.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would use it, and only because in my rig, I have so many things that are wide because they fit in little holes. You can't really see my view. There's no camera directly behind me, but literally the switches are there, the ATEM's there, and these are all in holes around there. So I'm not sure if a bigger vertical monitor would do more than just obscure my lines of sight.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I think ergonomically it's not really a good idea, because you can move your gaze left and right easily just by moving your eyes, but to look up, you're going to have to tilt your head back, and that's going to cause, repetitive stress injuries to your neck, I think.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I would love it. I've actually got 2 stacked monitors right here beside me, and I have just recently converted a bunch of my monitors over to the LG quad monitors, and what that's allowed me to do, like it used to be when we were doing screen scrapes, you needed to have a lot of monitors. And since moving over to NDI, I need fewer monitors. And so I've actually been able to reduce some of the monitors that I have and actually consolidate 4 computers to one monitor, or sorry, consolidate 2 computers to one monitor now. So I've got 4 computers now, not to confuse anybody. I've got 4 computers now that share 2 monitors.
And just as a note, we're going to go just a couple minutes over to finish a couple more questions that were already in the queue. It is super important for if your question didn't get answered, it got sent back to your notes. I think there's some new people in there that had questions, and we just didn't get to all of them, and we're going to push them back. A reminder to the producers that it's super important to vote on questions, because we're getting more and more to a point where we can't get to all of them in the first hour. So anyway, we sent some of those back, and we'll now go to the next question. We got 2 more questions.
Yeah, Ray Harwood in Avondale, Arizona, here in the panel is up next with, what is the likelihood that continued in-person conventions will be pinpointed as super spreader events and eventually make in-person out of vogue?
Go ahead, George.
Definitely, just listening to what the conversations here for our DC Convention Center, it's a problem, and they're thinking of ways. Last year we had a big setup for virtuals, and I think we're going to go back to that again. So it's a big problem for them right now.
Yeah, go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I think we have to remember lots of people learn different and experience things differently. And so not one model is going to work. I also hope that we learn to live with risk a bit better than we've been living. So I think there is a room and a place for in-person events and conventions. Do I think it'll work the way that CES, for instance, has worked for so long? I don't think it will, but I think experience and difference in people will make people like me want to go back to those things.
Yeah, I think that the thing that is starting to dawn on a lot of organizations is that when you, and I've talked about this before, that when you do a physical event, you're basically cutting out 99.9999% of your addressable market. And so regardless of how inefficient being online may be, even if it's only half or a third or a quarter or even a 10% efficiency to the physical event, if you can address a larger portion of your market, it doesn't matter, from an ROI perspective. And so physical events make a difference with decision makers. So bringing the right decision makers in that are going to be influencers within their industry and having them tell people what makes sense so smaller, more pointed events that are aimed at press or influencers or buyers, I think, are probably still a thing that makes a difference. But some of these really large events that are more of a retail event system probably are going to make less. We've talked to people we have partners that they look back over the last year and are seeing that their numbers for their virtual events were 10, 15, 20 times bigger than their in person, and their margins were much higher. And that's going to keep sinking in. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael has our last regular question for this morning. Global REMI may be technically correct, but Belfast Method is a more marketable name considering the NPR PC Magazine coverage. Which name would work best to sell the concept to management?
It's always a name. Technically telling people what it is what people do that aren't Apple. Like when people can't figure out why no one's paying attention to their thing, they should just look at the name. The reason that we're creating names for these is because they're much more marketable. And it hangs on something, has some mystique to it, as opposed to just something that's dry and technically correct. That's it's very rarely effective. Go ahead, Sky.
You nailed it with the marketing of a thing. But again, even the word Yahoo had to be told, the audience had to be told what the thing was. And we don't have the marketing budget. So I love the mystique of Belfast.
Yeah. No one, if we said global REMI, no one would care. Like, just so you know, like it would just fall into the, or we said remote takeover.
Well, it would be completely accurate.
Be totally accurate. No one would care. It would have never made it to NPR. There'd be no interest. There'd be it would have never turned the corner. Like that's, people, get into this thing where they want it to be technical or precise, and that's not what moves things forward. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, my website, I put together Geekazine 14 years ago, and a lot of people said if you try to do your own unique name, then it's going to be harder to really push that name. A lot of my podcasts have never been Geekazine. You might have Geekazine in the name, but it's more like a weekly show or something like that to get more interest.
Yeah, no, I've been in a lot of marketing meetings about people wanting to tell people what it is in the name, and a lot of us are just, it's rarely effective. That's all. So, all right. We're going to change subjects now to our second hour. And, we've been talking a lot about different levels of production. We talk about big productions, and we look at Sunday Night Football, and we look at a lot of other, which is a giant production. And we've looked at a lot of medium-sized productions. But what we haven't done is really looked at individuals doing this and really what it takes to actually make that happen. And so we thought it would be good to have this our New Year's Eve, or not New Year's Eve, but Christmas Eve event. Just think about what it takes to do it on our own, and what it takes to put it together without a huge crew and without a ton of gear. Well, maybe a ton of gear, but without a huge crew. And so we figured we'd jump right into it, and we've got questions already starting to line up. So if you've got questions about this or answers, go ahead and start throwing them into Mukana, and we'll go to the first question.
Okay, it comes to us from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he says, we talk plenty about having backup equipment. Can we talk about backup plans if you get sick or otherwise are suddenly unavailable?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it's definitely a good idea to start thinking of this right away at our church. We've had this ordeal where I've been out of town and somebody else couldn't can take over. So I made plans to just parsec in. So if you can do things remotely, like start streams, even we use a Teradek, which I was able to just open up the IP address in a browser window. So if you can parsec in, then you can start the stream, stop the stream. And I believe that you're using PTZ Optics cameras. Same thing with those. You could just open up a browser window and you can at least hit presets or with a little bit of lag, remotely control and push those around. So definitely come up with a plan and work the plan.
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, so as a solo performer, there's no choice but to cancel, right? So we would, I haven't had to cancel any of my personal demos, but I've had to cancel a club demo where we zoom out to a club of people that asked me to demonstrate. And it's pretty easy to work with them. You just reschedule and do it again. So on another date. Simple.
Yeah, go ahead, George.
So I'm just going to speak for my local ATM rig. At least 2 or 3 people know my rig. I try when I build anything is to get a few of my other technical friends to come in and take a look at it, see how it operates and see how it functions. That way they know if something happens to me. In the cloud, I think what Guy and a lot of us have been preaching also, this is what makes the cloud so attractive, is that anyone could operate your system from the cloud. So as we move on, those things are going to get a little bit easier for everyone to have access to your production.
I go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, most of my existence in work has been as a single point of failure person. In other words, a key person with a one-man crew, a one-man department. In other words, the job that I'm doing, I don't have any assistants, I don't have any underlings, I'm doing everything. So if I get sick, it used to be, if you get sick, you muddle through, you show up, and you work sick. And with COVID, unfortunately, that's just thrown a wrench into everything, because obviously you shouldn't show up sick with such a contagious disease. And it has been a big problem in production, in larger production, not shoestring production, because they'll do testing, on-site testing each day. And if you suddenly show up positive and you're a one-man department, the UPM has a big problem, and you can't always have somebody standing by, because you never know when that's going to happen. And other people, you can have a list of people to call, but that's about all you can do.
Yeah. Roscoe.
Noah Sargent, are you available? Because he's one city away from me. So therefore you have your local people to back you up. And, sometimes he could handle the whole production. I have no doubt that he could just take on something if I have enough advance notice. And then the other thing is a show like Tony's, I would ask Tony to have one in the can, that he has a show that's just sitting there. It's an evergreen show, hopefully, that he can push in there if he has to take a week off.
Yeah, go ahead, Tobias.
One in the can is a genius idea. I was interested in this question broadly, but I'm thinking also of rabbis and clergy that are doing solo gigs at a smaller institution. What I've seen is when they've gotten sick, they've gone into the Facebook rabbinical group and said, can I send my flock to your service? Who has one at 6 p.m. Pacific?
Right.
And so that's kind of a new bailout strategy that has only been in these last couple of years.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Greg.
So as George was kind of saying, having a cloud-based workflow is really helpful in those kind of situations. And one of the things that I've been doing is trying to make my workflow more bulletproof and having a very simplified workflow that I can use in the cloud, and then also building a network of other producers that can come in and help me if I do have an issue. It's kind of, and as Courtney said, sometimes you just got to man up. I mean, I used to work in journalism, and when I worked in journalism, I did all kinds of crazy things. I got shot at, I got beaten up, all kinds of crazy stuff. And then, but I was never really sick or injured for any long period of time. But then the first year I was in business for myself, I tore my Achilles tendon, and I did it in September. And at the end of September, and I had 7. This is what, as a still photographer, I had 7 more weddings to shoot that year. And I missed one wedding because I had to have surgery on the Friday before that wedding. But a week later, I did 2 weddings in one weekend. Now, I didn't do them by myself. I had people come and help me, but I was there. Like I wanted the clients to know that I was there and I was present, and I shot, and I still shot pictures. But going back to the cloud workflow, I recently had a friend and colleague that was in town for another event, and he had a conference, a virtual conference that he was also producing, and he needed space to do that in. And he asked if he could come out to my house and use some of my setup to produce his event. And I said, sure. So this was like a 3-day conference. And so he came in on Tuesday, got everything set up. I helped him on Wednesday. Thursday, he came in, he had a little bit of a cough. And so he was wearing a mask on Thursday. And then at 9 o'clock on Friday morning, he called me and he said, hey, I just need to let you know that I lost my sense of taste and smell. And I spiked a fever last night and I tested positive. And I'm like, oh my God, that is like the last thing I need. I had somebody, that's been working in my space here now, and now they're positive. Not only that, but he had one more. He had the last day of his conference that he had to finish. And so I wasn't going to be able to let him come back into my space and do that. And so in a 2-hour period, I set him up with a cloud workflow. We moved his entire production into a cloud workflow, and he had a laptop computer with one external monitor. And so in 2 hours, we were able to get him up and running using a cloud workflow. So he didn't have to come into my space and was able to finish his production.
That's great. Lois?
So part of this depends upon whether you are the producer or you're the talent, or in my case, both. And where is your audience? So as an example, I do a radio show. I produce it at home. I interview people, on Zoom, do all this stuff. But it's all done, and then I send the product to the station. So in that case, it's really easy to have one in the can, as someone say, or to play a replay or something like that. When I was live in the studio, if I suddenly came down sick, I could call the studio and say, I'm not going to be there. And then they would take care of how to do the replacement, what to put in, whether they wanted a replay or they wanted, I don't know, music, whatever. So a lot of it depends on if you're the talent or not.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I got shocked once a long time ago. I was chatting with a CEO of a pretty big company that I was working with, and I said, what's the most important thing you do with your time? And he looked me straight in the face and he said, succession planning. And
yeah. Well, and the most useful thing we had in the past and now what we're building here in the past, one of the things that saved me over and over again was Pixel Core, because I invested a lot in people, and when I needed them, I had them, so the thing is the number one thing that I do is build networks of people that can do this. And so if you're looking at Office Hours 2.0 and all the other things that we're doing, what we're trying to do is find a lot of people who are able to do that, and we're all learning together on how to do it, and we're trying to figure all of that out. But the goal is to get to a lot of folks. Then we're slowly coming to a point where, we're not ready to start doing what I call pouring concrete, which is this is the way we're going to do everything. But we are finding ways and finding things and having people build up that knowledge so that there's different people that can edit a show. There's different people that can do playback. There's different people that can host it or manage comms. There's different people, and we keep on spreading that out as far as we can so that we have the people when we need them. If you're not going to have them on the team, you definitely have to have them, as Roscoe had pointed out earlier, in your network, that are people who can, step up. And there are some things that you can just work through. I've worked through some pretty intense issues. I once showed up in Germany and I dropped a 75-pound or 70-pound case on my toe and broke it at the airport when I arrived in Germany, and then finished the show. But it was on a cane, on lots of drugs, and so those are the kind of things you do. But there are times when you're not going to be able to make it, and you have to figure out how you're going to solve that. But the other thing I would say is that if you are a one-person show, you have to take a lot of extra care. Like, the thing is that that's part of what comes with being a one-person show, is that you take care of yourself, you take care of your health, you take care of, like I used to DJ. I was a one-person show for weddings, as a DJ, and I would take the time it took me to get there, like it was an hour away, and I'd multiply that by 1.5, and then I would get there that much on top of that. So it would always be like I'd always be there 2.5 hours early, or because I knew that if I don't show up, they don't have a DJ. Like they don't have any music for their wedding. And to me, that was like terrifying. Like, you know, I would feel so horrible forever that I ruined their wedding. And so I was always really, really early for everything because I was the only person that was going to be able to do that, you know? And so I think that is super important, is that you have to take into account that a lot of people are, whether you're one person or 20 people, a lot of people are still counting on you. Next question.
Next one comes from our friend Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. And I love this question because he made a technical error, which may not be. I think he was talking about his sister-in-law, but he wrote, "My sister-in-law is thinking of doing a baking show on YouTube. What does she need set up, so forth?" Currently, she has an Intel 2019 MacBook Pro and a new iPhone.
Go ahead, Tony.
That was intentional.
Oh.
And
there you go. Okay. I should have known, Tony.
She is a fantastic baker and decorator of cakes, but she does not have any aptitude for doing anything technical as far as producing a show. She wants to do a show. And so with her, I was thinking, well, maybe Cinemaker might be an option, but if not Cinemaker, what should she get in addition to what she already has, the iPhone and the MacBook Pro? And so that's what I wanted to ask the panel.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
We watch these YouTube shows all the time, and we see a lot of great setups and a lot of simple setups. It's just take an iPhone and move it around, and they get thousands of subscribers on it. And I've talked to a few people that want to do cooking shows. The biggest thing I'll say about it is it's a personal space. When you start bringing your show into things like the kitchen or the living room or anything like that, there's other family members that might have a problem with how cameras are set up and things like that. So most important is to talk with everybody and see if that's a logistical ability to do that. And if you need to tear it down, how quick and easy it will be to tear down and set up, because you can stop doing a YouTube show if you have to sit there and tear everything down, put it back up every single time.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I would also recommend Cinemaker as a great starting spot, but next evolution would be Mimo Live, especially if you want to bring in a remote guest. Mimo Call is a nice way to bring somebody in simply. And then if you have a spare iPhone or iPad, it's nice to set up the show with their buttons. So that app is very programmable. So if you have a rhythm that you get into where you want to cut to that overhead shot, throw a graphic up, you can easily set up things to make that automated and one button push macros, that kind of thing. So I would highly recommend Mimo Live.
Go ahead, Sky.
I'd almost go backwards to StreamYard, because that's how we originally started, and we didn't have all of this additional ancillary gear, and a lot of that. And with the two sources, try to lock them down into a position that this one is for the showing of the food, this one's for the showing of the face. That way, those two images are always constant.
Yeah, I think that we're starting to kind of, the thing that I would recommend is the cooking show that we've been doing with Damianti and Shannon and so on and so forth. We're going to open that up a lot more. So Damianti is going to play along, but only cook once a month starting next year. And we're going to bring other people in to, cook. So I think that there's an opportunity to cook with us, as well as an opportunity to lead an event. And I think that if I was trying to prep for something, I would go do it with somebody else first. So use the what we're already doing and have her actually be one of the guest chefs and show us how to do something together, so we can all, so she can learn what it's going to take to actually host a show in kind of a safe space. If she's looking at doing it live and doing it for post is very different, so if you're going to do it in post, you can get away with an iPhone, to do that. But if you're going to do it live, I think doing it with us, if anybody who's thinking about cooking, I would recommend doing it with us in our weekly show, because we're going to be figuring stuff out. Now, some of the models is, for the live piece that we found, is a wireless IFB and a wireless mic are pretty useful in a kitchen environment. The other things that are useful are 2 or 3 cameras, one that's on you and one that's going to be on, I'm using 3 cameras, which is one on the cutting board, one on the stove, and I try to kind of form everything around that. And I'm looking at actually experimenting with Cinemaker on my location, just to be able to cut between those and zoom in and out and do all the other little bits and pieces. But those would be the things that I would think about there. But I would strongly recommend anyone who wants to do their own cooking thing is to join along and cook with us. Our cooking, our live thing. We're going to be doing that every week starting on the 9th. And to join and do it, and then possibly if you feel like you've got once you've done it a couple times and you feel like you've got something working, then lead one of them, and then figure out if that's going to be something that works, and then jump off. I think it's a great place to kind of incubate cooking shows, for people to just kind of come through, figure it out, and then go do their own thing. Next question.
Alex, what were your 3 cameras, please?
I'm using a 6K for my main camera, and then I had a couple iPhones. So 2 older iPhones that I'm using for the overhead cameras, but those could be lots of different things. And this reason Cinemaker might work for me because I might just put another 6K or another iPhone, and I've got lots of old iPhones. I don't throw my iPhones away, so they just sit around. I've got years of iPhones that are sitting around. But I think that you could get relatively inexpensive cameras that would make that work. Those are the ones I just found that they're really easy and fast. So next question.
Next one comes from Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. He says, how should Apple employees spend their $1,000 for working home expenses? And he wonders, is this a shoestring budget?
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, so I think the number one thing you should do is think about your audio and your microphone, because you can get a good enough picture, but if I can't hear you, it doesn't matter what you're saying. And I would tell you the second thing, which won't cost you any money, is to think through what you're going to say before you say it, so you can be succinct and accurate, because the best way to be ineffective in front of your colleagues is just to babble on.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug. Courtney.
Yeah, that is a shoestring budget, because if you can't buy any Apple gear for $1,000, you could buy the B-Link by Courtney. But seriously, I'd invest in an ATEM Mini Pro. Don't get the ISO because you're not going to need to record if you're just going to be communicating with the mothership occasionally, and get a good camera, like a DSLR, something that can autofocus and make you look good to the higher ups, and a good keyboard and a mouse, because the Magic Mouse sucks. Sorry.
Go ahead, Tobias.
If you're not purely remote, I really like having some duplicate equipment, so that way you don't have to tear down much at all and could just maybe take your laptop, but have a dock for everything else and have an extra mouse and extra whatever in the bag, and just that efficiency.
Go ahead, Bill.
Having worked in corporate so much, I can probably hear some of the discussions they were about the number of things like that. I mean, the number of employees Apple has is huge, even $1,000 per employee. There's also a thing that I learned when I was in corporate that sometimes it's really hard to give one-time things in terms of the corporate accounting thing. We once did a thing where we were trying to train the employees about corporate brands. So we did a little game show on TV where every corporate brand they would name, we gave them $20. And we got in so much trouble from HR and accounting about paying employees in cash and not having it in the system. Sometimes it just gets complex.
I will say that when Apple says, "Oh, we're going to give $1,000," depending on how they cut the employees, how they define the employees, that's a $20 to $100 billion. $20 to $100 million thing for them to do. So it wasn't a minor decision to send $1,000 to all their employees. I did put out a list of ideas for the Apple employees on Twitter, which was my most popular tweet of the month. So anyway, so it went well. The hierarchy that I always do every time I look at these things is, and we've talked about this before, is solve the internet, solve the audio, solve the lighting, solve the camera, solve the background. And so for me, obviously an Ethernet cable, but then after that, a good mic. And I've just gone to just recommending the MV7 because it's easy to have a USB, it's scalable, and it sounds great. And good because it has the XLR out. The Brio is still, I just got a new camera, by the way. Hold on. I order all these cameras and test them. And I tell myself I'm going to send them back, and I never do because I'm going to probably test them all together. I got this new one. This is the Razer. 4K to 1080p, I don't know, web camera that they promoted. And you can still get the Brio. Don't feel like you're missing anything. So I tested it. It still came up short. So the Brio, couple lights, I really like the 68Bs or the 68s from Nanlite. From cost per performance is pretty good. And then you get into the, that's the lighting and the cameras, and then the background. The Laser lights work great if you don't want to show people what you're doing. So those are the things that I recommend that fit right into $1,000. It took me a little while to figure out how to get those in. All right, next question.
Matt Cool in Montreal, Quebec. For those without a Blackmagic 6K budget, how can you get a nice image with a shallow depth of field in a small room with a small budget?
Go ahead, Noah. Noah?
So I'll talk about some generalities, and Roscoe can take us home with specific lists that he has in Discord. So for depth of field, the larger the sensor, the better, right? So the larger that is, the shallower you're going to get. On top of that, you have your lens, right? So a lower f-stop is preferred. A prime lens will give you typically a better lower f-stop so that you can have that shallow depth of field. And then also you want your subject to be further away from your background. So like in my case, I'm in about a 10 by 10 room. I'm pretty close to the wall. My camera's right against the wall. And so we have that separation with those three things that I just mentioned.
Now go ahead, Roscoe.
No one nailed it, because in a small room, the only thing you can do is really increase your sensor size or widen your aperture. So you might actually need to buy a lens with a wider aperture.
Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
I'm going to recommend a iPhone with Filmic Pro, and it should probably be a 10s Max or newer that you would use. That works really good, and you can, most of the time people have them, like Alex said, laying around the house. And if not, it's a good investment in terms of being a used camera for that setup.
Go ahead, Greg.
Noah gave some great info. So just kind of following up on that. So the APS-C cameras, the Micro Four Thirds cameras, they're going to have more inherent depth of field. So you're going to have less of the shallow depth of field look than a full frame camera. So I'm using, for example, I'm using a Sony A9 II camera with an 85mm f1.4 lens. More on a budget side of it, you might look at like a Sony A6000 or A6400 with like a Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens. Now, like that's going to be an APS-C camera, so it's still going to have a little bit more. Even at 1.4, it's going to give you a little bit more depth of field than what you might see on my setup. But that's a good budget option.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Okay, I had to click 3 times this time to get it to work. Sorry, everything's been covered pretty much. The one thing that hasn't been mentioned is if you have a camera that has auto exposure, auto iris, or auto exposure index, try a ND3 or an ND6 neutral density filter on the front of the lens, because what that will do is cause the camera to open up more, to allow more light in, and that'll give you a greater depth of field if you're using a Micro Four Thirds or something like a webcam where you really can't control whether it's the automatic exposures.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Lois Richter in Davis, California says, what's the minimum you can have to create a radio show?
Tony?
Best audio possible. The best microphone that you can get. The best microphone that you can afford. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, I just wanted to ask Lois, do you actually mean a radio show, or are you talking about a podcast? Because a podcast is a way smaller lift to get over than anything that is on traditional radio. So I just wanted to clarify whether you meant you had somebody wanted you to go on the radio and you wanted to do that from your house or something.
I do a weekly radio show. And so I guess my question was, I understand you need a really good mic. What's a really good mic? What does that mean?
What price?
0? No. Whatever is the minimum. In other words, if you recommend one that is cheap but is so bad that it would just be crackly, then no. But the cheapest one that makes a decent sound, and yes, it is going out over the radio, and I know that's not going to be as high quality voice as if you see on TV.
Right. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, I'm going to recommend the mic that I'm talking into. It's a Shure MV7, and I was told by audio people this has the style of a radio microphone. It's the presence, the local sign of it. But to answer the first part of your question is, I think you already have 98% of what you need, which is a passion and an idea. And in that order, now it's just a matter of getting that idea out to the audience.
What I would do is I would say an SM58 is probably the bare minimum of what's going to have. You're going to have a lot of off-axis rejection. high-end response is not great, but it is a relatively good one. The Yeti is not a bad one at 120, 150 bucks as far as getting that quality goes. And then the MV7. And the MV7, if you can afford the MV7, I would highly recommend it. We've started to really recommend that to a lot of folks. It's just simple. It's a USB. You can open up QuickTime and hit record if you need to, but you can definitely integrate it. You don't have to have any kind of other interface. If you decide you want to get an interface later, it's got an XLR out. So it's kind of, the problem with a USB only mic is that you're stuck with that. That's their pipeline. And so I think that those would be the ones that I would think about but that's the big thing that you need is a good mic. And I would recommend, if you can save up to get the MV7, I would get the MV7 over the other ones. And it's taken me a long time to find my way there.
I have a Yeti Nano. Is that as good as what you're recommending?
It's not as good. It's not bad though. You could probably, with EQ, you could probably get the Nano to sound to a point where people probably couldn't hear the difference between that. You may not come out of it live that way, live and raw. A dry Nano will not sound the same as an MV7, but it does. You could probably EQ it to a point where it did, and so then that would probably be fine. Yeah, but it's also proximity, of course, to the mic. So the closer you are to the mic, the better it's gonna, or within reason, the better it's gonna sound. Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas, says, what software licenses might need to be included on a Shoestring budget?
Go ahead, Sky.
Yeah, don't forget your Zoom. You want to start at least the pro level. And then, of course, I do all things Adobe because that's from my history, but there's a lot of replacements to those features that you can do otherwise.
I go ahead, Tobias.
Couple terabytes of Google Drive storage.
Go ahead, Noah.
I think the thing that's missing in this question is the purpose behind what you're doing, right? So obviously, if you're editing, you'll need a different set of programs than you would if you're live streaming. So I'm assuming for our content here, it's around live streaming, and that would be some sort of broadcast software. There isn't a license for OBS, so that's free, right? So basically, there are alternatives to each one of these things probably that you'll need that could be free, but yeah.
You go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, for me, I do live streaming as well as pre-recorded videos. So I use StreamYard for live streaming. Obviously, need the licenses for DaVinci Resolve. I bought the license because I've been using it for a year and I liked it, so I paid them the $300 for that. Also, I picked up the Affinity Trio, publisher, designer, and photo. A lot of this photos, fixed in Affinity Photo and stuff. So those kind of things help. And then I'm trying to think what else, but I think that's about it for my ads.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with. Most of my day-to-day stuff from a post-production perspective is all in Final Cut and Motion and Logic. So I kind of live in that world a little bit. I do like, for some of the higher end stuff that we do, I have to use Resolve because of the specificity of what it has and what I need related to HDR and some of the sound pipelines. The other thing to look at is, I have the Adobe Suite. I probably open it once a month, just to put it in perspective. I have something that has to be done in After Effects or something that has to be done in Photoshop, but I use Affinity very heavily, and then I use almost all my motion graphics for automotion, just because it's faster. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas says, Shoestring setups can often include free, open source, or improvised components. Is this risky when undertaking paid work, particularly live?
Go ahead, Noah.
I think the things you pay for are because they add value to you and what you're doing, right? So if you're getting paid for something, I think that automatically kind of elevates what you're doing. Another great thing about paid programs, generally speaking, is there's better customer service because there's people who are paid to be there, like if something goes wrong. Obviously, that's not 100% like consistent across the board, but in my experience, that's what I've seen.
Todd?
Yeah, so certainly there is risk, right? There's risk in what I do every time I step out here and use my companion buttons. But I've got it to the point where I'm comfortable using it, and I can always work the ATEM software to work around if something's not working right. It does interrupt flow of a show sometimes, but I'm not at that, I'm dealing with my audience who's normally 65 years and older. Typically is the average age of a woodturner. And so to get even them on a YouTube stream or a Zoom stream is a giant technical hurdle for them. So I think they're more forgiving for what I'm producing as a one-man person. So I live with the risk.
Go, George.
Production inherently is a risky business. It's risky when I'm answering one of these questions. My heart rate probably pops a little bit. You have to know your clientele, and whether you want to go with a certain, whether it's OBS or you want to go to ATM. You have to know if it crashes and burn, if that client is gonna, have a real problem with it. So you have to determine whether you want to use software or hardware base. I think it's risk overall, any of it, but you have to know your client.
All right, go ahead, Greg.
As George said, absolutely, production is a risky business, especially virtual production, because there's so many things that you have no control over. But the things that you do have control over, you should absolutely be the master of. And so anything that you're going to do for money, you should test. And I can tell you that I started on a big shoestring setup, with minimal gear. But I didn't just jump into paid work. I self-produced 15 events myself before I ever took on paid work. And so whatever you use, you need to be the master of it and make sure that it works.
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Greg got it. I would just add whatever he said, test more. And if you're using open source, test 15 more times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I define risk as the chance of something going wrong multiplied to the consequences of it going wrong. So chances might multiply the consequences. So if the consequences are low, and the chances of something going wrong is high, it's okay. It evens out. The risk evens out there. If the consequences are very high, then even a very small movement in risk becomes an issue. And open source is high risk. just be clear, it's like you are creating a high risk event, when you use open source software in your production. That is the reality. Now so when you decide to use open source software, you just need to, there's nobody accountable for it. I mean, just look at the Apache problem right now, and so that's the fundamental problem with it, that there's no one truly accountable for that software. And that creates a high risk environment, and so just, you just even know that you've created that. And so I wouldn't do high profile events, in that where the consequences are high. I think that if you're getting off the ground and you're doing stuff and your audience is relatively, like, there's a lot of things we did in Zoom that probably shouldn't do in Zoom. And we figured it all out because we were very understanding that if it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. But you can see that we've decided that doing what we're doing is important for Office Hours 2.0 because this is, I don't know, test number 34, before we, that we're running, and we're constantly tweaking it and trying to get it right before we turn it on. And so those are the things you want to think about, related to that though. But I would always consider open source software as a high risk of, situation. And then you just decide whether that's worth it or not. Next question.
Sky Gleason in Seattle is up next. He says, an actor friend wants a kit to do auditions over Zoom. What should I recommend to him?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Self-taping is the world today in acting. So if it's a stage actor, well, then, iPhones and high-end Androids are a necessity. That's just where the world is. But Google up self-taping. And then I would say if they are going to self-tape, you might actually include some sort of editing software. They don't want something too produced, but, just being able to lop off beginnings and ends is a big deal.
Go ahead, Courtney.
It totally depends on whether it's a live audition or if you're sending in a tape. But a couple of things to consider is a lot of times they always want to see head to toe, so have a big enough space where you can shoot yourself head to toe. Have a good microphone, preferably a wireless mic, so if you're moving around and acting out a scene, you're not moving off mic and you're not dealing with the room sound in the room. And good lighting. That's the other thing, is you want to light yourself so that you appear flattered, in flattering light. So hire a good electrician to come over one day and help you do your lighting, and then and save that lighting setup and use that for your auditions.
Go ahead, Bill.
100% what Courtney said. You don't expect an actor to bring in a snapshot as their headshot. That's something that they pay a good money for, a good photographer to light them well and make them look their best, because it is your resume. And exactly as Alex has been preaching to us for a long time, and I support 100%, your telepresence is your calling card. It is your resume. How you look determines how seriously they think you are taking your career. So investing in your career is, you are your product when you're an actor. So I'd invest in that as much as I could.
I go, it's Sky.
Well, what happened is this is a friend that supported me with the Graham Care Project, and it's his son who has been on stage in New York and Seattle and on the road, and is now working at a restaurant, but wanting to be doing more acting. So I was carefully listening, because my friend now wants to give the actor, his son, the kit for Christmas and his birthday. So I need some physical, tactical things. Alex?
I mean, so we've actually ended up, because of some of the stuff we've done, we've ended up coaching some actors on what to put in their apartments or houses and so on and so forth. And it's highly competitive, and they get that one moment live over Zoom. This is not stuff that's in post. This is stuff that they have to, these are big movies, and this is when they were doing it. They needed to be able to do a read with other actors and do other things and so on and so forth. So the things that we recommended were a DPA with a wireless transmitter. We had depended on the budget what that was. Some of these actors are making pretty good money, so they're, whatever we gave them, they would go get. So it was electrosonic with a DPA, allowed them to have a headset so that they could move freely around. Zoom, a Zoom. I think a lot of them were 16 to 35, because they did have to go to a wider angle, and then something that was a bit closer. The big soft lighting, like lots of it. So that's a big thing, because they had to look good in all areas there. I actually don't know how effective it was. All I know is they were really happy when they were done, and they were more excited to be on the show. And they also did. I think that one of the responses was they just felt like they dominated when they showed up, it dominates the audition, because the first couple of comments are always like how amazing they look, and that helped. They thought it would help a lot. I don't know whether, I haven't talked to them recently. I just know they went through a lot of auditions with the setups that we sent them, and they were very effective. But a lot of them weren't particularly inexpensive. They were, I don't know, $5,000 to $10,000. Is what we were recommending.
Okay, now on the $500 version of that, is there such a thing?
Brio.
Copy.
Brio and probably a Go headset. The Go with a little headset. I mean, for $500, that's probably the place I'd go. Let's jump to the next question.
Next question comes from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. He says, a lot of my work lately has been run and gun in person over cellular. For this kind of small market client, 2 to 3 camera and displaying comments live only, what could help convince these people to step up to the next level of production?
Go ahead, Noah.
I think another way to restate your question is like, how do I show this client that I'm providing value, right? Or the upgrading equipment or gear or whatever you're talking to them about is going to add value to what they're doing. And to be frank and honest, sometimes they don't see that value. And it's really hard to say and admit, like, I am not a fit for this particular project. And the more you grow and mature in what you do as a business, the more you're going to say no to clients, and that's going to happen. There's that old adage of, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You might be in this situation with this client where they're just unwilling to see the value that you're providing and not willing to spend the money on it.
I think of everything that I do as a big tank track. There is the stuff that's making money right now, the stuff I'm trying to get rid of, and the stuff that I'm interested in getting to. And there's always those three. And whether I'm working in a company in that tank track is working with certain folks, or if it's my own business or my own thing. I've been that way since I was young, and it's been fairly effective. So clients will either move forward to where I'm trying to get to, or I find new clients that will. Sometimes they don't. Either I just stop working on that project and someone else in the company takes over the pieces that are there. But I'm always trying to evolve and move forward. And when you look at us doing, a lot of people will say, well, why are we doing HDR and eventually 5.1 sound for office hours? because no one's asking for it. I don't care if anyone's asking for it or not. like that's what I want that business. Like I want that business, and so I'm going to start doing it. And and then you start having people show up and they go, "Hey, I really want what you have there," and then that's the client you want, is the ones that can see what you're doing, because that and so finding ways to do your own projects to do that and to figure out how to master them. Like we're figuring out stuff with about HDR, and eventually we're going to be figuring out stuff 5.1 that no one gets to figure out, because everybody who does it is at a high risk environment where they can't fail. There's a high consequence environment where they can't fail, so they're very conservative. We're experimenting all over the place, and we're figuring all these things out, and again, inspiring folks that are already reaching out, interested in what we're doing, because they can see something that there's always a client out there that wants to make an impact. So what you want to do is be constantly trying to figure out, to show them what the next impact moment is. How do you stand out among everybody else? The clients that aren't that way, you keep on servicing them until you have the clients that do. And then you need to either push them off to somebody else that's connected to you, or push them off overall if they're not going to progress. So next, go ahead, Lois.
Well, one of the things you might consider, if this is something that happens to you fairly frequently, is you might consider doing a sample show. Not something that is theirs, but something that is just sort of generic. Do it the way they want it done, and then do the exact same show the way you think it should look. Mm-hmm. And then you would have a video to show them basically before and after, and maybe that might change their mind.
A lot of it's also being patient. There's been clients, I had a client that I talked for 2.5 years that they should go to live. This was in 2010, 2008 to 2010, like, hey, you should do this live. You should do this live. Or maybe it was even earlier than that. And so, but I just kept on saying that. We just kept on doing the work we were doing for them that had nothing to do with that. And, eventually we got the chance to do it because we were the ones that were constantly mentioning it. Not an annoying, I don't think an annoying sort of way, but just constantly bringing it up and showing examples and showing stuff. So a lot of it's just putting it out in front of people and having them get inspired by what's that, oh, I could do that. The other thing to look at for Shoestring that I just want to say, I don't know if it's going to come up otherwise, is it's really important to think about how to look good at doing what you're doing. One problem that folks that do Shoestring, if you're doing it for yourself, it's one thing, but if you're doing it for other people, how you arrive, what your kit looks like, how you hold yourself, how the team, if you have a team or if it's you and one other person, how you operate in all those things. It's not what people notice, it's how they feel about you, and whether they feel like you're giving them a high level of support, or you're just kind of giving them a scrappy solution. Those things make a big difference in how people, because I had clients when I first started as a Shoestring. We kept on thinking we had to do it cheap, and then they went and hired someone that cost 3 times as much as we did because they had a nicer office. So you just have to understand that what you don't want is a client to get inspired by what they're doing with you, and then immediately drop you when they decide that they're actually going to get serious about it. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. Go ahead, Todd. And I don't know what you're doing there. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah,
I'm
thanks.
sorry. No, I'm sorry, not you. Bill had clicked something different. So anyway, go ahead.
Okay.
You go, Todd.
You were mentioning a few things that made me want to click the button to say a comment here.
Yeah.
In our little world of wood turning, there's a couple dozen, 3 dozen turners that do these sort of remote demonstrations to clubs or to individuals for a paid fee, and a lot of them are stuck on the webcams. So they've got 3 webcams around their computer, around their lathe and stuff. And then contrast that with some of us who've upgraded to, mirrorless cameras and RX100s and other stuff that has a much better picture, able to control image quality better, lighting is a bit better. And there's a stark difference between the quality of the show. So there is some... in a soloist sort of world, comparing yourself to other soloists to see where you stand in that field, and know that eventually people are going to gravitate towards the one that looks the best.
Yeah, and the more you can stand out from the ones that make that look the best, the better. I mean, remember that it's not what people notice, because they won't notice the difference. They'll just feel it. They'll feel like you're smarter. They'll feel like you have it more under control. They'll feel all those other things, and they'll gravitate towards you. And that's what a lot of YouTubers have figured out. Go ahead, George.
Alex, I think you mentioned something really important that a lot of us don't take consideration when we go into events, is showing up and looking good, but showing up. A lot of times we show up with gear in cardboard boxes, and that's like the worst you can do. Have your cables neatly wrapped. A lot of times I see folks just pulling cables out and it's just a big bunch, and clients look at that and they go, my God, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. It's important to have your gear laid out, clean, nice road cases. I know it's expensive, but showing up with the original box and having all your gear in cardboard boxes, problematic.
You're just never going to move forward without that. You have to figure out how you're going to invest into getting something that has people see that you could be something more than that. Next question.
I believe the next question is Josh Kaufman's. Is that correct?
No, you have Ray. There's a difference.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there we go. There's a difference between producing your own solo show versus producing an educational webinar for someone else. For example, what difference in setups are needed between the two event types?
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, those are really two different arenas, and I don't know that there's a real short answer for that, but I think a lot of it comes down to infrastructure and contribution. So, and how are you staging your contributors, and how are you going to present them to the audience? So are you using something like Zoom or Video Ninja for contribution, vMix Call, and then how are you going to present those folks to the audience? And then there's a whole lot of audio routing issues that go along with that. So it's much different process.
Hey, go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I was along the same lines as how is this person coming in? But, if kind of the equipment we have around us would work, if that person is going to be in the same venue with you, if they're going to be remoted in, then that is a very different workflow. But I'd say, the ATEM Mini, the pocket type cameras, that kind of stuff that you may have, I would say you're going to need more cameras if it's an educational person, because more than likely they're going to want to get a demo in or walk and talk a little bit. So, those would be the variations.
Go ahead, Bill.
I agree 100% with Greg. And it was interesting watching our good friend Victor Cajeo, who started Basic and built a one-man operation where he was switching, running cameras, and performing live. The amount of steps that he had to go through to get there, it's just not simple when you're having to split your brain in two parts like that.
Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, make friends with lots of people that can help you, because if you're going to be the talent and the button pusher, you need a lot of practice in that. And Victor's a perfect example of that, because he continued to get better, but also we continue to see friends come alongside. And this is where Tony is the talent, but other people are pushing the buttons back behind the scenes. So there's some examples there.
Yep. Next question.
Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Affordable solutions to capture, send windowed NDI from production PCs to recording PCs with audio. NDI screen cap is full screen only, and OBS only sends program audio. Audio NDI solutions, maybe? And he notes vMix desktop capture is not stable for him.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I don't know that I have an answer for him, Alex, but I know that NDI screen capture does have an ability to capture a region of interest. So you can actually define an area on the screen that you want to capture. I don't know. I'm not certain that you can do that with audio. And I'm also curious, Josh, and maybe in the chat, if you could just indicate why you think vMix desktop capture is not stable, because I was trying to think of some use cases where I've really needed to have a windowed capture with audio. And I can't really think of one. And anytime I have used windowed capture, I've always used vMix desktop capture, and it's worked well for me. So I would just really be curious to have a little more information about it.
Good guy.
Yeah, first off would be OBS, but knowing that Josh has had this question for a little bit in after hours, I would say that you're going to have to go to the paid version of software if you want to get this done right. And so in Wirecast, there is the ability to set up not just the screen capture, but you can go in here and you can select the window, and you can select what audio device. So when you do say capture window, so it's capture monitor or capture window, and then you can select hit configure, and you can select the application, and then you could select the window of which one you want, and then you would output NDI up top, and then it'll flow, and you can choose your audio source here. And there's also some other things, like if you are doing HDR, you can flip the dynamic range and limit it out. But yeah, here's a spot where you would say NDI output, and then you would kick that out, and it works.
The next question.
Next one comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana again. And Chris says, the lowest production level I do is run and gun using a Peplink router, 3 iPhones, an iPad with switcher audio and a Rode Go 2. Is there
Switcher
any...
Studio. It's an app.
Oh, Switcher Studio, that's right. And a Rode Go 2. Is there any simpler setup for in-person streaming?
Go ahead, Tony.
I don't think so. I think that with that particular setup, the most important thing is the internet connection between the devices. And the Audio Switcher Studio is similar to Cinemaker in that they kind of operate the same way. So that the internet at the location is the most important thing.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that I don't know. I've played with Switcher Studio and some of the iPad ones. I wouldn't use those in production, to be honest with you. Like they are not stable. I can't make them stable in my environment, and so I just find myself constantly being frustrated by them. I keep on playing with them, and I'm going to play with them some more. I keep on wanting, feeling like it's me, but I've never had any of these be. And I will admit, as someone saw in the Isadora lab last week, I have a propensity to break things, like just the way I operate with them. I don't know what it is, but so maybe it's just me on an edge. But to me, simpler would be to take those cameras and run them into an ATEM. Just convert them into HDMI and put them in, so I can tap hardware buttons. And again, it's just because I have a tendency to break them, and I've broken all of these where they're just wonky. And I haven't been able to be. I haven't. The only way I do wireless right now that seems to work is my Apple TV with into my ATEM. And then I just share from the camera. So anyway, that's the only thing I would say is, to me, simpler would be hardware. Next question.
Laura Seal in Greensboro, in North Carolina, says, gifting some Brios this year, is the webcam settings app the best way to dial them in?
Go ahead, George.
I've tried a few of them, and I always come back to webcam settings. It's the first one. It was the first one of the first out on the Apple Store, but it just works.
Yeah. I would agree. I think I've tried them all, and I'm still using webcam settings. Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada, up next with any lighting tips and tricks for working on a shoestring, position, temperature, and so forth.
Go ahead, Todd.
So I'm no expert, but I do have 2 lights lighting up my green screen that allow me to get an even key. And so beyond that, it's learning how to balance the cameras. I got 3 different cameras: camcorder, 4 different cameras, studio camera, camcorder, G85, and an RX100. So they're all different makes. So I've been learning how to do white balancing. I'm still learning. And I've just picked up for post-production a color card to do some of that. So I think, having good lighting, especially for what I do, is important to see. Sometimes it's too bright when you get your subject you're looking at is, if you're doing a light wood like pine, the lights get very harsh on that wood and blows out and just blows out the image. So choosing your subject matter is important, especially in kind of what I do. So a nice walnut, a nice cherry, woods that don't blow out your camera, or whatever subject you're looking at doesn't blow out your camera. So
go ahead, Noah.
I'll start with the basics. The most common lighting setup is what's called 3-point lighting. So you'll have a key, a fill, and a backlight. And so you'll start with your key. That's usually your brightest light that lights up your subject. Ideally, that would be, at least in my preference, would be diffused. So you have something in between the light source and your subject to help soften the light, right? So there's cheap ways of doing that, which would be like shower curtains, parchment, kitchen paper. There's also a 5-in-1 reflector on Amazon that you can get, and the middle piece is a diffusion, right? So that softening up that light will help make it more even spread and not be so hot spotty on your face. The next thing would be color temperature. You just want everything to be at the same color temperature, whether it's daylight or tungsten. My personal preference is daylight because it matches windows, but that's going to be on you. And that's what I got for now.
All right, go ahead, Roscoe.
China balls, China balls, China balls. Inexpensive. Play with them. Position them wherever you want. Hang them from the ceiling. Duct tape them here and there. They're really inexpensive, and they give out good light. Get the whatever lamps you need to put into them, and you can actually get cheap dimmers too, and try those.
George.
I'm just going to add one: bounce boards. Don't it's cheap. You could buy white foam boards across the board. It's pretty cheap, but bouncy light also will help.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I started with China balls, and then I got these Niwar on a shoestring. This kind of an 18-inch. It's a very soft white. It has adjustable color temperature and adjusts evenly from tungsten to daylight, and it doesn't change the exposure. You can dial it from 0 to 100%, so you can set the level and the color temperature separately. They're not remote controllable. That's their one downfall, but it comes with, this package has stands, it has a carrying case, and 2 lights, and they give a pretty flattering light, and it's soft and even and adjustable in color temperature continuously from one to the other. So that's what's really important.
Can you put that link in Makana, please?
I certainly can.
Next question.
Jan in Canada is up next, and Jan says, is there AI for any of the human tasks done for media production?
We're doing a lot of procedural things within office hours. So in the office hours 2.0, a lot of things that you're seeing there are being done by the machine. So not always perfectly. So that's what we're still working on. But so like the lower thirds are being generated by the people that are in it. The super sources that you see popping up within office hours 2.0, that's all being generated by Makana. So it literally knows who it's putting where and puts them in and tells the switcher to go do that thing. And so a lot of that stuff is being dynamically generated by the system and delivered to the operator to make that happen. And you'll probably see us do more and more of that, where we're trying to make the operator's job easier to do those things. Like we know anything that's repetitive is something that you can have the machine do for you. And so we're looking at repetitive tasks and things like, I want to dynamically bring up 4 people in a super source and give you their lower third for each person individually. I can tell you that's not a simple thing for me to do quickly in almost any app that's out there or hardware. Whereas all of these things that you're seeing, all the graphics, those are all being activated by a user, but they're all being loaded dynamically. And so there's a lot of those things. If you watch a Friday, again, all of us doing live should watch Sunday Night Football. I'm just letting you know. You should watch Sunday Night Football. Like it is the quintessential, the highest quality. Big chunks of that's being generated by live data, and so, but it is the ultimate live event, and it happens every week, and you only get to see it for 18 weeks of the year. But it is the ultimate live experience. And so look at how they do the lower thirds. Look at how they do, and we can talk about it in after hours or whatever. But it is we should at least know what's possible, and that's about as far as it can go. Next question.
Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia says, panel, I have not yet heard the Shoestring setup, hardware including lights for a show.
Go ahead, Tony.
So I have here, this is a PAL microphone. I think when I first got, this pair cost $14, I believe. It's one ear. Headphone, Apple leftover headphone for the headphone. And you need a Mac Mini, an ATEM Mini Basic. And this is not a buy once, cry once setup. This is to get you started, and you probably will upgrade things as time goes by. But you want the ATEM Mini, basic ATEM Mini, the headphones, the power mic, a monitor, Mac Mini, newer lights, and that should get you going.
Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, so I kind of started similarly. I had a C920 webcam into my computer in vMix and did my first sort of live stream that way, a single camera. I got the ATEM Mini February of 2020, so just before the pandemic hit, and had a G85, which I had for photography, for doing all my product shots, and a little $49, knockoff GoPro sort of thing that still had menus around it and stuff. But that was a 2-camera setup, just in a laptop. I've since grown to obviously, Blackmagic Studio 4K Plus and G85 RX100. So it's no longer really a shoestring setup, but started that way for sure.
Go ahead, Lois.
So I misread the question. I thought that Tony was saying, can we do a show showing what people are using? And that got me to thinking, wouldn't it be nice if we did a very short show where we had someone walk into their, normally lit dark house and had the folks telling them, now put on this, now turn on this, no, move that light over there, that kind of thing. And it's sort of like the cooking show, but how to make a streamer out of you.
We've often joked that it'd be fun to do at this old house, except for this old studio. And we just kind of like, this is what we're building out. This is how we're doing it. Go ahead, George.
I think office hours, Tony, has become hard to do a shoestring budget. But anyway, I'm gonna take a shot at it. I think for anyone that's starting a production right now, they're trying to do it from your desk, from home. ATM Mini ISO. I think one of these mics will be fine if you're going to be communicating with clients. So the ATM Mini ISO, Zoom ISO, so you could bring those guests into the ATM. I think for me, that's where I would start right now if I'm doing production from home and I can afford a whole lot more.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Tony. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Tony, are you gonna you have hand raised? Yes, no. Roscoe.
Variety is the spice of life. And so After Hours is a wonderful place. If you have a specific question about, hey, how are you doing something? Or even the lights in the background is a big topic of discussion. So come to Office Hours. You can ask any question about anyone's setup at that point in time and be free to learn.
And I'm assuming that you're talking about doing something physically at home or on a shoestring as opposed to online, because online, the reality is you can run it on your own in Zoom, from the Zoom interface. Like just you can do that for clients. That's what my wife does actually. So she's running events for lots and lots of people all the time, and she's doing them all in Zoom. There's with no special anything, So I persuaded her to let us take one of the rooms in the house and turn it into her studio finally, because I'm like, you should be presented correctly if I'm in the same house. Like, this is crazy. So, but she's doing it with a webcam and her and the mic on her computer. So anyway, and she gets a lot of good feedback. So anyway, so I don't think that the only reason I say that is that you can do Zoom events that way. And then I think that then you have to decide, I think Greg is the perfect example of, building that all in the computers and in vMix and in the cloud and all those things, you don't have to do all of it at once. Again, you can build up this business, in increments. We've done Office Hours has been mostly done just with the native Zoom settings, so like it's really, we spent the first 500 episodes just doing it with Zoom. And even now most of it, other than us getting good video going in, the infrastructure of the show has been pretty sparse, as far as what it takes to do it. So keep that in mind. I do think that if I was going to do it with hardware, I have to admit, I would really lean towards an ATEM, just the Mini to get started. And I love iPhones, to do these things. Like when I do iPhones for these things, I really enjoy. I like having one camera that's like my 6K or it can be a Sony, 6000 or 6400 or something like that. But I think that the iPhones I'd be tempted to use 13s if I could afford it, only because the macro is incredible. Like it really adds something if you're doing behind the scenes. Like I can zoom into. I shot a video of a spider this big on my desk wandering around. It looked like a giant beast. Anyway, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he's specifically for Greg. He says, Greg, you mentioned getting more calls for in-person events. Have you ever thought of adopting the Belfast Method or the Tony Mobley process to bring those events into a distributed world?
Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, we actually have implemented some aspects of those methods or processes. Back in November, I was probably one of the first handful of actual Zoom events, conferences. It was a full day event where we had some concurrent sessions going on. And so I had remote producers that were involved in doing those things. We did this all up in the cloud. And so I had a producer from Dallas, Chirig, helped with that. And then I had another producer from LA, Bill Hops, helped with that. And then probably the best example was about a month or so ago, I had a day where we had 3 simultaneous events going on. So I had 2 virtual events and then one in-person event. And so I brought Jonas in, and Jonas managed all of the cloud infrastructure for me. And then I had a producer in the West Indies, Marcus Fook, who came in and he cut one of the shows for me. And then Bill Hops from California cut the other show. And then I produced the in-person event myself. And so, yeah, we're definitely paying attention and trying to make use of all the techniques we can get.
And again, I'm going to keep on coming back to the best way to get good at this. If you're thinking about doing this, is to get involved with what we're doing. In office hours. The office hours 2.0, the Mobley process, the Belfast method, the we haven't figured out the Reynolds, the Caheo concept. All these things are things that these are all experiments, but their number one is they're getting to know other people, and they're learning the processes and getting used to comms and getting used to show flow and getting used to. That's way more important. Of understanding how to make a great event is way more important than any of the buttons that you're hitting, because we're going to keep changing that, and it's going to change faster and faster and faster over the next 4 or 5 years. So all the technology is not as important as the understanding in the human network that you're going to build, where people know that they can trust you to figure it out. So I would highly recommend getting involved with what we're doing. Next question.
Laura Seal in Greensboro, North Carolina, again says, any opinions, on the gripper batteries distributed by Zacuto compared to V-mount or Gold mount?
Go ahead, George.
I've heard a little bit about the gripper, but I use Antimbaro mounts, specifically Core SWX batteries. I think they're industry standard. I want something I could use on any device, any camera, versus something with a different mount. I just want to also let folks know, you can rent any of this gear from Lens Rental that we talk about each and every day and test it out, play with it. The weekly rentals from them are great. So you can test it out. So Lori, getting back to your answer, I don't know that much about it, but I'm a fan of the Antimbaro mount.
Next question.
Next one comes from James Hutchinson in Dublin, Ireland, and he says, on behalf of all of us producers and listeners, I just want to wish all the panel a very special, safe, and peaceful holiday. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Moving on, it's Tobias Moss up next, and Tobias says, moment of frivolity, make up your own origin story for the term shoestring budget.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, potatoes come in that can, and they're really small and thin, and so those are shoestring potatoes, and so that's where shoestring budget is, because they're small and brittle. And anyways,
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, back in the early days, I started on a shoestring budget, and I worked hard, and I scrimped and saved, and eventually I moved up to the
Velcro
budget, and now I'm on the Velcro. I've graduated to the Velcro budget.
Go ahead, Tony. Tony,
you've all heard the story. I started with a maybe $150 Mac Mini. iPad, a MacBook Pro 2012 that barely worked. You couldn't hear me, couldn't see me. Really kind of crazy. And I'm looking at a studio in my living room that my wife is still allowing me to operate in. That's not bad for a guy from where I came from. I mean, I'm happy and thankful to this community for the help and family and friends that helped me get to this space.
Absolutely. Yeah, Bill.
In Pocatello, Idaho, in the early days, there was this guy who raised potatoes, and his most popular product were these really thin potatoes, and he didn't have any money, so he traded them, and so it became his shoestring budget.
Go ahead, Sky.
Once upon a time, there were skull candies in our site, and so they're pretty thin. They could be shoestrings, but we've learned to grow, and community is king.
Go ahead, Lois.
Well, we here are using belts and suspenders, but if you don't have that, all you've got to hold your pants up is a shoestring.
I once lost. I think it's probably connected somewhere to the fact that we once had a head for one of our. We had a head for one of our lights come apart. Right before a show, and I literally pulled the shoestring out of my boot. I had these high boots at the time, and I pulled it out, and we tied it to another C-stand that came across. We ran another C-stand and then tied it up to it. And we said, literally, we have created, this is now officially a shoestring budget, because we didn't have anything else to do. And we had to literally hold it up with, and I walked around with I taped my boot shut. And it was literally a shoestring budget. I think that somewhere that's where it became, I mean, not mine, but somewhere 50 years before me, someone had to tie something together and decided that was it. Last comment.
Todd Raines, Allen, Texas, wraps us up this morning. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to all the Office Hours crew, producers, and watchers.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny. Someone asked me, because we'll be on tomorrow, and they were like, "You're working on Christmas Day," and I'm like, "It's not really work. It's hanging out with my friends." People go to their little Christmas parties. This is my version of the little Christmas party, and hanging out. This is my favorite people. So anyway, I think that it's easy. So I hope everybody has a whatever you celebrate tomorrow, even if it's just you're celebrating Saturday. So I hope everybody's having a good time. Definitely want to thank, of course, our producers for all the good questions of kind of moving everything forward. It was a great conversation. It's all your fault. Well, mostly your fault. The other people's fault, if we're going to pass that around, is to our wonderful panelists who came in and contributed back to everyone. So thank you so much. We appreciate all of you. And a reminder that at 2:00, Elle and I will be talking. We might get Tlaloc in there as well. We'll see if we can pull him in, and we'll be talking about Isadora again. And then tomorrow we will still be doing education. People keep asking. They keep on not sure that's really going to happen, but it is. So we'll sit around and we'll talk until we run out of questions. Anyway, so that's our big plan. And have a good happy holiday. And we'll see you all tomorrow. And right now we'll see you in after hours. All right, see you later.